Imagine your 91-year-old grandmother found unresponsive, and then you shake her and she's stiff as a board and she's cold and she's not breathing. Paramedics show up, they walk into the room, they check her pulse. Right then and there, they confirm it. Nana is dead. They take the body away, bring it to the morgue. 11 hours later, grandma's chilling at the mortuary. She's zipped up in a cold storage body bag. Somebody at the morgue starts hearing rustling around. They open up the refrigerator, unzip the bag. Nana's in there. She sits up like the Undertaker. That's what we're going to dive into today. The bizarre world of Lazarus Syndrome.
I saw a guy on Instagram do a world record free dive the other day on Instagram. It was crazy.
So let me ask you: did the guy go straight into the earth and splat and die?
He didn't.
Oh, well, if he did, there's a chance that everyone would assume he's dead, and a very slight chance that he would all of a sudden, to everyone's surprise,
reconstruct his entire being,
come back to life. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about something that we've kind of touched on tangentially.
Yes.
Tangentially.
Yeah.
Something we've talked about in the past a little bit, which is called, it actually has a name. So it's called Lazarus Syndrome.
Back from the dead syndrome.
Yeah, basically. Well, listen. Okay, so I'll put it this way. All right, let's have a little imagination time here. Imagine your 91-year-old grandmother is found unresponsive. You walk into the house, you see Nana, she's laying in her bed, and you think she's asleep, and you go, "Nana, time to wake up." And then you shake her, and you go, and she's stiff as a board, and she's cold, and she's not breathing.
This could be really triggering for some listeners.
How old people are always falling down for attention?
Well, she didn't fall down. She laid down in bed and just went to sleep and never woke up. So what do? What's the first thing you do?
Call the 911.
You call 911.
Yeah.
And
how still is she?
She's pretty still.
I don't know if you call 911 in that scenario. Do you? You call the non-emergency line.
Well, no, I think you would call 911. I would call 911.
The 1-800 number.
Because I would be like, I want to, maybe there's a way we can like resuscitate Nan.
For sure.
So 20 minutes later, paramedics show up. They walk into the room. They check her pulse. No signs of life. Paramedics right then and there, they confirm it. They go, "I'm so sorry. Nana is dead." So death certificate is issued. You start the process, start planning the funeral. They take the body away, bring it to the morgue.
Many hours have passed.
You start the process of mourning, right? You follow standard procedure. You call the local funeral home. You're starting to arrange to have her body to be, prepped at the mortuary for the funeral. And now let's fast forward 11 hours later.
11 hours.
Things move very quickly in this scenario.
Okay.
Grandma's chilling at the mortuary, literally and figuratively.
Mm-hmm.
She's zipped up in a cold storage body bag. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly...
How cold is the storage at the morgue?
Probably pretty cold. I mean, cold enough to not cause rot.
Right. So
it's a fridge.
So like in the direction that this story is, I think, inevitably going, how do you survive the cold storage?
Well, in this cold storage, somebody at the morgue starts hearing rustling around.
No.
And they open up the refrigerator and they unzip the bag. Nana's in there. She sits up like the Undertaker. Mm-mm. And her first words when she speaks are... Oh, sorry. That's
Portuguese?
She is not from here.
I'm cold. So very cold.
Okay. Yeah. That's what she says.
Please, dear, can you bring me a warm blanket? Also, where am I?
Oh, so Nanny is, so the cold storage turns you into salad fingers.
Yeah. This is actually a real story. This is not some plot of like a weird comedic horror movie. Hey folks, if you wouldn't mind doing me a huge favor and just take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and of course hit the thumbs up button as well. And hey, look, if you don't have time to watch the video right now, I ask that you just take a second to add it to your watch later playlist. It would mean the world to us. And thanks for being here. All right, without further ado, let's get back to the episode. This is exactly what happened to a woman named Janina Kolkoyets. She's a 91-year-old woman from a small town in Poland, and she was declared dead, transported to a morgue, and somehow she woke up. And Janina was sent home later that day, where she reportedly enjoyed a bowl of soup and some hot tea to warm herself up.
Yeah.
This is an actual photo of Janina.
Close to being dead.
Babushka.
Babushka, she's from the old country.
She's
Sure.
from
She's from the old country.
Yeah.
No, what's crazy about this? Several things. Obviously, I'm sure there's more crazy that we're going to learn about this.
Yeah.
But like the cold storage part for me. So an old person. I mean, you see old people that are that old, and you're like, you're fragile. Like there's,
and they're always cold.
and like, yeah, right.
Yeah, the circulation's already.
Yeah.
And then you take them. You think they're dead, and they're obviously not, or maybe they are dead, and somehow they come back to life later, or they will come back to life. You put them in a cold storage. Like, could you imagine taking a live 90-year-old woman and going, okay, what we're gonna do, Nana, is we're gonna get you to take off all your clothes, and it's February, and it's a mild February day. It's 2 degrees outside Celsius.
You kind of nailed it. Cold storage is between 1 and 4 degrees Celsius. For our American listeners, 34 and 39 degrees Fahrenheit.
Just above freezing.
Yeah.
And we would like you, with all your clothes off, to go outside, and we're gonna get you to spend like 7 hours out there.
Yeah, but
What happens to that grandmother?
so I think what happened.
She's dying.
I think what happened.
She's
here,
also wrapped in she's also in like a leather, like a body bag.
yeah,
Right?
but also
But still,
I think you're
I
missing
don't know
the
what
key
the
factor
insulation
is that
value is on
this
body bags.
this is obviously a rare occurrence.
What's the R value on a body
And-
bag?
And the thing is, the important thing is that that isn't mentioned in this article is that she was trained by Wim Hof,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so
I mean, again,
she was just doing like breathing.
I gotta say, old country, different way of living, right?
Yeah,
Hard living.
used to growing up with no heat on in the house.
That's right. You know?
Could have survived the Holocaust.
Well, so
Polish,
true, yeah.
possibly.
yeah, very potentially 91. That was probably a few years ago too. So, okay, so how does this happen? Right? This sounds completely absurd. It sounds made up. What makes someone cross the line between life and death and then come back? So that's what we're going to dive into today: the bizarre world of Lazarus Syndrome, spontaneous resurrections, and the strange medical phenomena that challenge what we think and know about death. One of the reasons I wanted to dive into this was because of our very fascinating conversation that we had with David McGinley last week about death and dying. So let's get into the history of it. The name Lazarus Syndrome, where does that come from? Well, the name actually comes from one of the Bible's most famous resurrections, the story of Lazarus.
One of.
Lazarus.
I thought Jesus was the.
Well, this one's a little bit. This one's fairly famous, mostly because Jesus was the one who actually made this happen. Jesus was behind this.
And where does Lazarus come from? Is it the place that Jesus was? Was he in?
Lazarus was a
He's a
man
dude.
from Bethany.
okay.
He was mentioned in the Gospel of John, specifically John 11, 1 through 44. And he was the brother of Mary and Martha and a very close homie to Jesus. And in the story, Lazarus fell ill and he died. By the time Jesus arrived in Bethany, he had to walk in sandals. Lazarus had been in a tomb for about 4 days. And in a dramatic moment, Jesus commanded Lazarus, he was like, brother, I ain't done with you yet.
I'm feeling vulnerable, and you're my dude. And I've been sharing with you, and no one knows my vulnerability like you do. I need you back.
And the
Yeah,
Romans are out to get me. They're going to nail me to a cross.
Yeah.
And I need you here by my side.
Yeah. He was like, I left my seed phrase with you, and I need to get into my cold storage wallet, and you can't be dying yet.
Yeah.
So Jesus commanded him to rise. Miraculously, Lazarus, allegedly, walked out of the tomb still wrapped in burial clothes. Now, this is the actual verse, or one of the verses from John 11.
When he'd said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around
There
his
he is.
face.
Wow.
Look at
Jesus
him.
said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go."
He's a
I've
mummy.
never seen it. Now, isn't it? I mean, wouldn't it be just really, really, really funny and comedic if all of the things in the Bible, they actually happened exactly as they happened? We just didn't have the scientific language or understanding to describe anything, and they just so happened to all happen in a very condensed period of time. You know, like
Well,
like-
the Bible isn't
like
a
it's-
condensed period of time. Like the
you know,
Bible
it's like,
takes
it's
place.
like somebody who gets hit by lightning like 5 times in a year, and you're just like, wow, statistically, that would never happen, but it did.
I mean, yeah, Jesus. Well, Jesus died at what, 33? So 33 years. He did. So this was one of his most sort of like awe-inspiring greatest miracles.
His greatest track.
Personally, I like the one where he just like turns a big old barbecue into a raging party by turning water into wine and
Right.
and what
Right.
he turned bread into fish.
Something like that, yeah.
But this one's pretty wild because it symbolizes the divine power over life and death,
Of
which,
course.
spoiler alert, this wasn't the last time Jesus pulled these kind of shenanigans. So why is Lazarus the perfect metaphor? Well, his story resonates because it's not just about revival. It's about defying the permanence of death itself. This symbolism made the name Lazarus a shorthand for anything that returns from apparent death. So, we got, what's that back there? Blade. Pretty sure vampires, you could just call vampires Lazaruses if you wanted.
There's a prolific hacking group from North Korea called the Lazarus Group,
Oh, yeah?
but I don't know why. I don't know what that has to do with returning from the dead.
Well,
Especially since
Yeah.
North Koreans, I mean, if you're in the government, you don't die. They don't die. None of the North Korean, anybody, if you're elected, sorry, did I say elected? If you're in the government because you've been chosen to be there,
Selected.
you've been selected to be in the government.
Selected.
yeah, You don't die. No one dies or poops.
So while the name Lazarus Syndrome was not actually coined until the 20th century, the idea of people returning from apparent death has existed for centuries. Early accounts of people waking in morgues, in burial shrouds, or coffins were sometimes attributed to divine intervention, as which, like, I feel like even today, people would attribute it to that, depending on who you are and your kind of cultural background. Today, the term is used in medical journals, and it serves as a reminder that even with modern technology, and, talking to Dave McGinley, depending on where you stand with that, it reminds us that we don't always fully understand the line between life and death. Even whenever we think we do, something happens where we just don't, Eggs are good one day, and the next day they're bad. But then the next day, the whites are good. And
Do
then the
you
next
think-
day,
Right. But avocados never go back to being good.
That's right.
Once they're
do you
bad, they're
think-
bad.
That this is like a form of medical malpractice where the doctor or whoever is like declaring that the person is deceased has just made a mistake.
well,
Or is this a fact of like,
got an-
it, like
I've
they
got an
died and they
interesting-
actually did?
we
come
will
matter.
get into some of the like speculations around why this is a thing, but that's a really interesting take.
So in like coming up like through the like education process of being a yoga teacher, and I went like really deep on yoga and history and philosophy for many years. And so trying to make this as like short and concise as possible. Basically, in like modern yoga, there's like one guy more or less that like birthed yoga and ended up being like the reason why it propagated out into the world. And his name was T. Krishnamacharya, and he basically took yoga that was like this thing that no one really practiced in India, or it was for a very select group, usually like a priesthood. And Krishnamacharya was like, no, this shouldn't just be reserved for the, this like religious caste. It should be available for everybody. So he went and he started teaching students on his own, and he ended up going and traveling around
Martin
India, traveling around India and like doing demonstrations. And he would use his kids. Like he trained his kids in yoga, and he would bring them and do like.
I've seen this guy.
Like Rebecca Cohen.
Takes the kids and like flips them around and does crazy shit.
Yeah, does a whole bunch of stuff. But
Yeah.
they're also doing like breathing exercises and showing meditation examples and stuff like that. And Krishnamacharya would do this demonstration where he was like, listen, I can control my body and my state of mind to such a degree that I can lay down on this table and basically meditate myself into what a medical professional would call being dead. You go, my heart rate will go down to essentially a speed that from somebody examining me, they'd go, his heart's not beating. He'd be like, it is. It's just beating at such a slow rate that it's not even detectable, whatever. And obviously they don't have at this
One
time,
beat every 11 hours.
they don't have the technology to like measure brain activity and all this stuff. This is like the 1930s, 30s or 40s. And,
Yeah,
and
see,
so,
it's hot stuff.
and
See?
so he would put himself into the state, and then he'd get a medical person to come up and examine him. And who knows? I mean, this is a long time ago. Who knows what the fucking truth of this all is? But I'm listening to this and going, is this woman somehow, maybe not through her own intention, but just fallen into, and is this the case with people who have Lazarus Syndrome? They fall into this like from a medical examination standpoint, they're dead, but they're just at this like ultra low like brain activity. And because if the body shuts off and the brain isn't getting oxygen and you're not breathing and the heart's not pumping, you know, if somebody goes brain dead and they don't have any oxygen being pumped into them or they die, I mean, if they don't get any oxygen to them, I mean, they're toast. I mean, your brain can't.
That's what I was saying. Like,
You would think.
Is this a misdiagnosis? Like, are they just not properly
Right.
examining
Like
their
they were
brain
never
activity
actually
and-
dead.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
in some state that was not fully dead, but from an examination standpoint, they seemed to be dead, but they were obviously still getting something that kept their brain from.
They're just on this crazy meditation.
One might
Yeah.
say undead, right? I actually don't know. It's so weird that they call like that zombies are called undead. I don't understand that.
I also don't get that.
Well, so interesting points there, and you know, you guys are talking about it from the current like era, and with the technology that we have today. I think with what you're talking about right now, some of the cases from like, you know, the 18th century and a lot of the fears in the 18th century probably stem around, I wouldn't say medical malpractice, because I don't think it was malpractice. I think it was just like
They just didn't know.
a lack of like knowledge at the time. So back in the 18th century, it was the fear of premature burial was huge.
Yeah.
Doctors didn't have machines to monitor heartbeats and brain activity like we do today. There was no stethoscopes. There was no EKGs, no MRI scans. It was literally just a finger to the wrist, a mirror to the lips, you know, and sometimes they got it terribly, terribly wrong. This uncertainty created one of the most primal fears in human history, which is, what if I am buried alive?
Here's one. Ninepence. I'm not dead. What?
Is it
Nothing
Ryan
gives you
Reynolds who's in that
ninepence.
movie
I'm not
called
dead. Yeah.
Coffin? Is it called Coffin or is it?
Yeah,
The entire movie
The entire
that takes
movie-
place
Yeah.
in a coffin.
Is it Ryan Reynolds? I think it is Ryan Reynolds.
So in the 18th and 19th centuries, this
Buried. It's probably called Buried, not Coffin. Coffin's name.
it was a terrifying possibility that sparked paranoia, rumors, and ultimately it sparked a lot of innovation. Very interesting innovation. So safety coffins became a fad.
Oh, like with a little bell or something.
Yeah. So
Wow.
safety coffins were elaborate devices designed to prevent a premature burial from turning into a death sentence. They often included tools for escape or, like you just mentioned there, Brian, signaling that the deceased was actually alive.
Ding, ding, ding. Yo, I'm in here.
Yeah. So here is a photo of one of these safety coffins.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was picturing.
Yeah. So this one here, you can see for those just listening, it's a diagram of a man. He looks like a friar, classic 18th century man in a coffin. But the coffin isn't just a box that is the length of a human. It looks like it has like a chimney, like a stovepipe.
I think that's
It's like a
the
little
headstone.
submarine.
No, it is not the headstone. So
Okay.
what you're looking at is the coffin under. This would be underground.
Oh, okay.
That entire thing is an escape hatch with a ladder that leads to the top. And also on connected to the very top, you can see there's a little like device at the top and a rope. And the rope goes down that like chimney, that escape hatch. and the rope is in the hands of the deceased, and the dead person can pull on that rope and ding a bell, and the bell is above the ground next to the headstone, and it will ding and ding and ding. So the undertaker is walking around and he hears the ding. He goes, "Oh,
Dude, how crazy
Joseph's not dead."
would that be to be in a graveyard and hear that? And for sure, somebody has, in history.
Yeah. So here's the thing though. These coffins were really, they weren't accessible to everyone. There were some barriers to access, which was money. They were for wealthier individuals, and they would pay extra to have these coffins as a kind of insurance policy against the possibility of being buried alive. Now, the features of the safety coffins, like we mentioned, there's bells or whistles, which I like the idea of it. Like they just create this like super long like flute. And we're like,
if you're in there, play hot cross buns.
The string or the rope would usually be attached to the buried person's wrist or their finger, so they could ring a bell above ground. This became so common that it inspired the phrase "saved by the bell."
Oh.
No. Really?
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
So breathing tubes were another thing that they would install in some of these. Long pipes extended from the coffin to the surface to allow airflow if someone woke up on the ground, because of course, like you'll die of asphyxiation if you're buried in a coffin. I wonder how long that coffin movie. I mean, I guess it's the whole length of the movie. It's only 2 hours, so who knows how much oxygen you would have.
Let's figure that out.
Again, they had escape hatches, so there was like a lever or a latch where allowed them to climb out.
Didn't David Blaine do that? Didn't David Blaine get buried alive for a certain period of time?
He sure did.
Mr. Beast did it recently too.
And they also
7 days buried.
Yeah,
Mr. Beast did it, or he had somebody do it.
He put he put Janina in a.
This was all Mr. Beast.
Yeah,
this was a part of Beast Games.
And she was like, so they also would put a vibrator down there in case you got bored.
That's sick.
But here's one of the wildest designs.
5 hours in a coffin.
One of the other innovations that kind of popped up around this time was one inventor created a coffin with a built-in feeding tube and alarm system. The idea was that if you woke up on the ground, you'd have food and water while you wait to be rescued. They'd send down a pre-chewed sandwich or something, and then you just open your mouth and it would fall out of the tube.
It would be crazy if somebody was saved not by the bell, but by being part of coffin flop. And like they were on their way to the grave, and the bottom just broke out, and then they woke up and they were like, "Oh, I'm
How
alive."
awful would it be if somebody chews up a sandwich, grinds it because we're talking a long time ago. They don't have a blend tech, so they chew up the sandwich, they put it in a little bag that somebody can suck on. Yeah, but the person who chewed up the sandwich had norovirus,
had the plague,
had norovirus, and so the person is like, "Oh my god, I'm alive in the coffin." They suck out the sandwich in liquid form. They have that. They get norovirus, and then they just and throw it themselves and throw up to death in the coffin.
Yeah. Actually, I feel like Norwalk or norovirus, probably more so like they had what's it called that killed so many people? Cholera.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you rather
not me though
buried alive?
No, you're good. CF,
yeah, as long as I had that air tube.
Yeah, Saved by the Bell with CF.
Would you rather be buried alive and then wake up and just die from asphyxiation, or just being buried and not being able to get out? Or would you rather get norovirus and have that take you?
I'd rather die by asphyxiation.
Yeah, me too.
Have you had norovirus?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I really don't know. Both of those sound terrifying.
Have either of you had norovirus?
I'd rather just
no
keep napping.
It's really, really awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I was in a coffin with it,
yeah.
I mean, no contest.
So why did it happen back in the day? Well, of course we don't know, but in the absence of modern medical tools, doctors relied on observation alone, which led to obviously a lot of mistakes. Conditions like hypothermia, comas, or catalepsy, a condition where the body becomes stiff and unresponsive, could mimic death. During outbreaks of disease like cholera or the plague, people were often buried quickly to avoid spreading infection. I'm sure some people were buried just like even when they even knew they were alive, just because of it.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Some real life examples of premature burial from back in the day. In Germany, a woman named Margaretha Seiler in the 1700s was declared dead and buried, only for the gravedigger to notice her body was warm when he dug her up to rob her grave.
Whoa.
And she was saved, but she misplaced all of her rings.
Crazy.
Oh, wow. How did he spin that story?
Yeah. I just had a gut feeling. In 1896, a woman in France named Philomene Jontré was buried after being mistakenly pronounced dead from cholera. Her family heard faint sounds coming from the crypt and rescued her in time. I mean, I think that's where it's at. Get a crypt, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like going underground.
You need
Get
a
a
lot of
crypt.
money for a crypt. You got to be wealthy for a crypt.
But now they just like 9 out of 10 people get cremated. So it's like,
Is it 9 out of 10?
I don't know. I just
You
made that stat up.
Yeah,
But that feels
seems
about
high.
right.
You
don't think so?
That feels high.
Yeah.
I think most people are cremated.
I would go with
in-
70%.
in Canada.
Yeah, I don't know if it's as high as 90.
Look it
90's
up,
I
high.
feel like it is high though. I feel like it is up there. So the cultural reactions back then, the panic led to these precautions. Many people requested that their bodies be kept in a holding room for several days before burial to like ensure they were dead. Some families began watching over the deceased during the wake periods,
75%.
not only as a sign of respect, but also to confirm the person wouldn't suddenly wake up. But this also led to a bunch of really interesting superstitions and folklore. So premature burial helped fuel myths of the undead. Not a great name. From vampires to ghosts. Vampires. When the graves were opened, bodies were sometimes showed natural signs of decomposition, like bloating or blood seeping from the mouth, which only like increased these fears. This here is a photo of an actual person named Zosia. This is what they think she looked like. She's kind of a baddie. And when they buried her, that you can see they buried her with a scythe that was pretty much implanted right above her neck. So if
I've seen this.
and they thought that she was they thought Zosia was a vampire.
Right.
What they also did was they padlocked her ankle with a heavy weight,
Whoa.
so that if she did somehow sneak underneath the scythe, that she would at least have a hard time.
So the idea is that if she were to wake up, that she would wake up and like kind of thrust
Sit
her
up.
head forward and sit up, and then the scythe would cut her head off or cut her throat.
I feel like
Yeah,
you'd have to
exactly.
sit up with quite some force.
well,
to
if
like
you're
really
a
cut your head off.
but if you're a vampire, you have super vampire strength.
Right. But
Right,
then you would
that's
be
right.
able to, like, even if you snuck around the scythe, you would be able to move with the weight, no problem.
Oh yeah, probably. But they were
Yeah.
stupid.
Yeah.
So it was 17th century Poland. And this was a notable burial practice, which was placing a sickle across the neck of the deceased to prevent them from returning as a vampire. The method was intended to decapitate the individual should they attempt to rise from the grave. A prominent example is the discovery of that woman's skeleton in Pien, Poland, buried with an iron sickle positioned over her neck and a padlock on her toe.
Do you think
Also,
it
much
ever
foreshadowing of the impending communist invasion from Russia after World War II.
Do you think that it ever happened where somebody sat up and cut their head off?
Yeah, I mean, it could have if someone. So again, like not because they were a vampire, but because they were buried and they thought they were dead and they weren't.
Do you think in that case
Probably not, though.
they would sit up
justified
fast
speaking.
enough to cut their head off?
No.
No, but they don't have to cut their head off. They just have to cut their throat.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
like, is it that sharp?
scythes are like
I mean,
sickles
if
are
you-
pretty sharp.
If you sharpen it a
Yeah.
lot.
Have you ever
like,
seen videos of guys at farms like
Getting
using
like
a sickle to
cane
like?
or like
No,
stuff
they
like that?
use a sickle. So like they do it in replace of like machinery, and it's pretty sweet.
to like
looking.
chop down crops?
Yeah.
To like take down exactly like long crops, and it's very meditative to watch them do it.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever had a paper cut?
Yeah.
Think about that across your neck.
Yeah.
No.
So here's the kicker: premature burial was not a rare event. In 1895, a medical journal estimated that up to 2% of burials were
Wow.
of people who weren't actually dead.
That's a lot.
That's like showing up to a funeral and there's like a 1 in 50 chance that your homeboy is just going to be like,
So it's probably not surprising that Lazarus
where am
came
I?
back, right?
Right. I mean, it's not crazy. It's very within the realm of possibility.
Because like that's 18th century. What were the stats in?
See, that's what I'm saying is that they were like, it's a miracle, and really it was just like, well, he just actually wasn't dead.
Yeah, but Jesus did it.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And what you're saying is everything in the Bible is just coincidence and not an act.
It's coincidence
of
that
God.
all these miraculous things happened so close together, but all of them are now mostly explained by medical science.
I don't know about that. So the science, speaking of, the science behind Lazarus Syndrome. So far we've explored the history, the fear, the folklore surrounding people coming back to life. But what is the actual science behind Lazarus Syndrome? How is it possible for someone to be declared dead and then seemingly out of nowhere, the heart begins to beat again? Well, in the case of Janina, doctors theorized that her condition was caused by severe hypothermia or a slowed metabolic state that mimicked death. So what do? They make her even colder. In older individuals, the body can enter such states, making it difficult to detect vital signs. Lazarus Syndrome, also known as auto-resuscitation after failed CPR. I prefer Lazarus Syndrome. Refers to the spontaneous return of circulation, also known as ROSC, in a patient who has been declared clinically dead. It typically occurs minutes after CPR has been stopped, leaving even seasoned doctors baffled.
It's idiopathic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How rare is it? Well, it's extremely rare. A study in 2020 reviewed all of the known medical literature on the phenomenon and managed to find 65 patients who had experienced auto-resuscitation between 1982 and 2018. Now, out of 18 of these people, so 28% of the 65, managed to make a full recovery after their run-in with death.
And
18 of 65.
But the
18
65
people.
were out of how many? Like it was all people that they looked at
65 patients are the only recorded cases between 1982 and 2018.
And then when we're assuming that's like pretty much everybody who has been reported dead over that period of time.
Well,
that the data has.
That's the data, but again, this is the kind of thing where it's like really tough, right? Like how much of this is being reported, how much of this is being properly recorded. It's such
How
a
many people is this happening to, and then they actually just end up dying?
Because the morgue was closed that night and no one was there, and they just they actually caught hypothermia and died. But then you'd probably there'd be signs of that, right? Because of if they woke up and they were like alive, and they were in the morgue and they were in the freezer, and they couldn't get out, then when they come back on Monday morning and they look in at the morgue, obviously I think the morgue's I think it's 24/7. I think it's a 24/7 type of biz, but. Let's just say they close for the weekend. They come back. But even if it's a 24-hour biz, it like if you're working at the morgue, you're not in the like autopsy.
But they come back and they go, this person's in a position that doesn't make any sense.
No, dude, I bet you that kind of they'd see it and they go, oh, Jesus Christ! I hate working here.
I must have put them in that position when I left.
Yeah,
but I don't remember.
So what causes it? There's no single explanation that accounts for all cases, but researchers have identified a few plausible theories. Number one, air trapped in the chest, hyperinflation. During CPR, air can build up in the lungs, creating excessive pressure. When the compressions stop, the pressure might suddenly release, allowing the heart to restart. This is one of the leading hypotheses for Lazarus Syndrome.
I wonder if that's why you do chest compressions and then you stop, and then you do them and then you stop.
I mean, this is basically what happened to the economy.
Actually, I think that's old. That's old theory, right? You
compressions
just do
now is
now,
like do them
nonstop.
until somebody else
Speaking
replaces
from
you.
experience of doing them, you don't like. I mean,
Speaking
I was
from
so
your
jacked
experience,
up. I was so
your
jacked up.
experience, don't do them.
I didn't stop doing
them.
Yeah,
you did them when you shouldn't have.
No, you're talking about
the Calgary
you're talking about the
airport.
guy in the Calgary airport.
I'm talking about the time you broke Taylor's ribs when he just got too high.
Yeah.
Delayed. That's a past episode if you want to find that fun story. Delayed effects of CPR drugs. Okay, so here's another one. Medications like epinephrine and atropine, often used during resuscitation, can take time to fully circulate and take effect. So in some cases, the drugs might kick in after doctors have stopped trying, leading to a spontaneous return of circulation. Another one is electrolyte imbalances.
Yeah, take a
And
sip.
this episode is brought to you by Gatorade G0.
What a
Lazarus, no Lazarus. Not today, Jesus.
What a refreshing sip that looked like.
Another one is, right, so sudden shifts in potassium, calcium, and other electrolytes in the blood can cause the heart to stop and restart. Reperfusion injury. When the heart starts beating again after being deprived of oxygen, it can trigger a sudden burst of activity in the body's systems. And then finally, underlying health conditions like hypothermia, Janina, where the body slows down to conserve energy. It may mimic death. The body might still retain enough function to restart itself under the right conditions. Lazarus Syndrome obviously challenges our understanding of death. It raises a lot of fascinating questions. When is someone truly dead? Well, in most cases, death is declared when there's no heartbeat. When there's no breathing, there's no brain activity. But Lazarus Syndrome shows that line isn't always so clear. And many doctors now wait a little longer before declaring death, especially in cases where resuscitation efforts have been extensive. So here's some real life examples in the medical literature, those 65 cases. There was a hypothermic patient. In one case, a man was resuscitated 15 minutes after CPR was stopped. He had suffered a cardiac arrest while being treated for hypothermia, which actually slowed his metabolism down and preserved his organs. So,
Wow.
they did CPR. He was freezing.
Did he make a full recovery?
I don't know about that one, but I do have an example of one where there was. Another one. Here's another example of the delayed effects of CPR drugs. This is actually interesting.
We need a Jovi punch clip here.
We've got so there was a woman in the UK, and she regained a pulse 20 minutes after being pronounced dead, and it was likely due to the delayed action of adrenaline administered during resuscitation. Here is an actual clip of that entire thing happening, which is wild.
8:01 p.m.
So there's the punch of adrenaline right into her heart.
20 minutes later.
Yeah, and there she goes. So very violent, very intense. Interesting stuff. I have another one here. This one's about a 66-year-old man. But I know that a lot of the stuff we've been talking about here might be a bit medical heavy for any of our Gen Z, Gen Alpha listeners out there, which is like so many of them. It's
crazy.
No cap.
Flooding.
So I actually took this next case and just we sent it to Nathan, our Gen Z consultant, and he punched it up for me. So here we go. So this 66-year-old dude is vibing at home when his body decides to pull some Ohio level nonsense. His abdominal aorta is ready to skibbity bop bop yes. In translation for you guys, his main blood vessel was about to rupture and it was looking really bad.
Yeah, I got that.
So the guy's backstory, he's straight NPC energy. Smoked a lifetime's worth of cigs, 50-pack years. Like, bro, why? High blood pressure, check. Mini stroke a few years back, also check. Kidneys, mad sus. They're not even pulling their weight anymore. So he pulls up to the OR looking like a Walking Dead extra, pale, sweaty, and breathing like someone just whispered, rent's due tomorrow. Turns out his biggest blood vessel, the abdominal aorta, aka the body's OG pipeline, is about to blow. Doc's like, we got to save this man yesterday. They dump a bunch of warm IV fluids into him and boom, his BP levels up to 120. Crisis managed for now. So the surgery starts. They knock him out with some sleepy time juice, aka anesthesia cocktail, and everything's looking Gucci. The surgeon comes in and starts to flex his skills on the guy's busted blood vessel. They slap a clamp onto the aorta to stop the bleeding, and things are holding steady for a second. But then the chaos. Halfway through the operation, his heart straight up says, "I'm out, skibbity." It's chaos in the OR. His heart rhythm's a full sus spiral, ventricular tachycardia into full-blown cardiac arrest. The team's working like it's their final boss fight. Chest compressions, shocks, meds, the works. After 17 minutes, it's giving GG, no response. GG. But after 17 minutes, it's giving GG no respawn. The doc squad calls it. Time of death, 6:17 a.m. It's looking like this man's story has hit the ultimate Ohio ending. But here's the plot twist. 10 minutes after they packed it up, the surgeon's like, wait a sec, I'm feeling something sus. And boom, this man's heart decides to drop a skibbity reverse.
A resurrection.
The resurrection is about to take place. They hook him back up, and now it's heart rate back to a respectable 90 BPM, blood pressure vibing at 90 mmHg, and lungs back online like LOL JK. So the surgeon and the team are fully shook. They're like, all right, bet, let's finish this. They patch up his aneurysm while dude's body is like, you thought I was gone? Cap. The comeback of all comebacks, post-surgery, my man is in the ICU, looking rough, but he does the impossible. He fully slays his recovery. Like, how? Brain sharp as ever. Memory doesn't even remember the chaos. To be honest, probably for the best. Ohio behavior, if he did. Body back on its grind. By day 13, he's discharged like, yeah, I died for a hot minute, but it's cool. Just another Tuesday. And the aftermath, 5 weeks later, this certified legend is back to full-on living, no cap. The man literally pulled the NPC to main character glow up of the year. He's probably telling his grandkids, yeah, I died once, no big deal. So yeah, skibbity sus. That's
Dude, made a full recovery to be a full gooner again.
yeah,
wicked.
just straight back to gooning and 50 packs a day. So okay, what does it feel like to come back? Well, I'm guessing it doesn't feel great. Patients who have experienced Lazarus Syndrome describe a range of experiences: total blackness or no memory of the event. Some report near-death experiences like feeling of floating, OBEs, bright lights.
What's OBEs?
Out-of-body experiences. Yeah.
An ND.
A near-death experience. Others feel disoriented and in pain as their body struggles to recover from the trauma of cardiac arrest and CPR, which is pretty intense.
Yeah. Amen.
So why don't we hear about it more often, right? It's rare, but it's also, they think, fairly underreported. Doctors might not document cases if they're unsure what caused the revival. Like this is the type of thing where it happens and it's so outside the norm that it might not even get reported because of that.
Do you think it's a case of like, I imagine a doctor who like witnesses that and they're just kind of like, that was crazy. Probably shouldn't really.
Witnesses the person come back?
Yeah. Like how do you, is there even like a method for reporting that? You know, like how, do you just write it in a chart and you're like, hey, like almost died, came back to like,
Well, it's probably so rare that
dead, came
it
back to
probably
life.
provokes a whole slew of craziness.
Like, is there a method for reporting that and saying like, hey, by the way, hospital, this is what happened to this patient? They're like tracking that in some way?
I mean, that would be tracked in like the patient's like medical records, right? Like, but again, do they track it and go, it was very bizarre. We did CPR 15 minutes later. He was resuscitated. We thought he was dead. Or do they just state it like that, like as fact like that, and not go and not make a big deal of like the bizarreness of it?
And I guess my question is like, I'm assuming there's no box on your chart that's like, did they die and die and then come back to life? So like, is it just written in some notes that's in someone's chart? And like, how do you actually report that so that we even really know?
But it would just be it would be a catalyst for a whole bunch of other exploration of like
sometimes, but then I think sometimes not, because just because of like someone's method of reporting,
or
right?
like hey, maybe this is going to be a lot of paperwork if we mention that this happened.
I mean, maybe. The other thing too is in some countries it's seen as taboo or connected to like spiritual beliefs where, you know, maybe families might not choose to speak about it publicly, or there's like just weirdness around that.
Right. Like if you're in like a really like deeply religious society, where it's like, it's actually viewed as like in, we were talking about the telepathy tapes a lot lately, which is out of context for our listeners probably, but where they won't
be for long.
That's right. Cause we're going to talk to somebody from it, but where they're like,
spoiler alert.
we actually don't talk about that because if you're like a really Christian family in a really Christian community, and I tell you that I'm experiencing telepathy with my kid, you're going to think that maybe my kid is like the devil.
Or that it's just too wackadoo to even like feel like, you know, it's like you brush it off because you're like, that, I don't know.
Or it's like you work on a severed floor and you have an innie and there's just too much stigma around that and you just don't want to admit that.
Oh my God, guys. Severance is so good. Oh my God.
I didn't know what you were talking about there for a second. I thought you said, when you said severed floor, I was like, is this like the circumcision wing of the hospital?
I'm so deep on the severance lore.
Ethical implications tied to it. So timing of death declarations. I mean, I'll pose this to you guys. Should medical professionals wait longer to ensure someone's truly dead? And how long is long enough? Some hospitals now actually follow a policy of waiting up to 10 minutes after stopping CPR before declaring death.
Well, I mean, if they say that if they say this happened 65 times since 1980 or whatever, and reported, and in like, you know, mostly all of those cases, if they do come back, it's within minutes, like it's within a 10 or 15 minute window. And then this woman from Poland is like the exception of all exceptions, where it happened, you know, several hours later. Then, you know, you would probably say, okay, well, if it happens on if 64 of the 65 cases happen within 15 minutes, then, you know, maybe we'll give it a 15 or 20 minute window after to say this is most likely when this is going to occur.
Yeah.
And if it's after that, it's just an anomaly.
Yeah, like probably they should, but also I imagine that there's some sort of spectrum of the medical care team being unsure. You know, like there's in terms of like, hey, like we're super sure this person's dead.
Right.
We're maybe a little bit less sure that this person's dead, so we're gonna wait a bit longer.
Well, here's the other. I'm going to throw another wrench into the equation here. Organ donation complications, right? So in rare cases, Lazarus syndrome has occurred after death was declared, which then raises concerns about when is it safe to begin organ donation procedures. And typically, those procedures need to happen sooner than later, right? So like, when you start to look at this, it gets all tricky.
Yeah.
Or maybe they just like, if they need to donate the organs, maybe they can like give them like a shot or something to make sure they're like fully dead, you know, like do something to like fully make sure they're fully dead.
Or is there something that they can give them thinking that they're dead that preserves the organs for a period of time before they take them out? Is that a thing? I would assume that's probably a thing.
They probably do. There's probably some sort of preparation, I imagine.
Yeah, maybe it depends on the organs.
Who knows?
Because I'm assuming they're probably not like, this person just died 2 minutes ago. They're signed up as an organ donor. We're gonna roll them into this next door OR and take out all their usable organs. I mean, there's got to be some period of time where, I mean, just because the medical system is such a machine, there's got to be something where they're like, we know that we can give this thing which will keep their organs. Maybe there's an oxygen
they chill them
situation.
Yeah. So organ donation procedures need to happen very quickly after someone dies to ensure the organs remain viable. The timing depends on whether the person was declared brain dead while on life support or experienced cardiac death when the heart stops. After brain death, organs are still getting oxygen because the person's on a ventilator. So that's like if they're on life support. Surgeons typically retrieve organs within a 24-hour window. After cardiac death, the heart and blood flow stop, which means organs start to deteriorate really quick. And retrieval must happen within minutes to a few hours. Kidneys within 30 minutes. Liver and pancreas within 4 to 6 hours. Heart and lungs ideally within 4 hours. And then tissues like the cornea, the skin, bones, they can last longer and can be retrieved, up to 24 hours after death.
Wow.
Yeah. So sooner the better is essentially.
Also, they just need those little coolers because like that, I mean, that's what you usually see with organs.
Yeah.
They just put them on
dump out the Bud Lights and chuck in a couple.
And you know that the hospital's got the line on all the good coolers because whenever you're in need of a cooler and you go to buy a cooler, all you get is the soft ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like where are the hard coolers? You
in
know?
the hospital.
They're in the hospital. They're hogging the supply. It's like 2020 and toilet paper.
Yeah. Yeah, they
kinda
got that
bullshit.
they got that Yeti sponsorship.
To be honest.
So yeah, Lazarus Syndrome might feel like something out of a biblical story, but it's a stark reminder of how we truly, we still don't quite understand the boundaries between life and death, and the science is fascinating, but for every question that it answers, it seems to raise a few more, and that, my friends, is everything that I decided to put effort into learning about Lazarus Syndrome.
Well, you
And
did a
all
great
the
job.
questions that come up are more questions for Sick Boy to explore.
All right, well, that's it for this week. Thanks for tuning in, folks. If you want to support the podcast, first and foremost, head on over to YouTube, hit the subscribe button, like this video, save this video to your watch later playlist. We're trying to kind of figure out our ways around that YouTube algorithm, and it would really, really help us if you did that. Even if you're not a big YouTube goer, maybe this is your way in. Maybe this is your way into that rabbit
And like
hole.
sometimes it's just like fun. Even if you're listening, just put it on your TV
Yeah.
and like watch it in the background.
Yeah.
Like when we bring up all those cool visuals and stuff, you can just take a glance over and see what we're looking at.
Yeah.
And also, it would mean the world to us if you took a moment to like and subscribe to the podcast on any of your favorite podcast audio platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcast, all that garbage. And while you're there, leave a rating and review if you can do it. That would be great.
And if you want to be a guest on the show, I mean, all of our guests, they come from taking the time to go over and let us know why we should have you on the show. So you can go to sickboypodcast.com and fill out the guest form, and maybe we'll talk to you about how you came back from the dead.
And a huge thank you to Donovan Morgan for the sound design, for Jer for all the editing, and that's it.
That is it for this week. Until next week.
I'm Brian.
Yep.
I'm Taylor, and I gotta pee real bad.
And I'm Jeremy, and this is Sick Boy. This is a little-